All right, cool. And we're going. Oh. All right, so this is Derek and Enrique, and we're just going to have a little bit of a chat with respect to front matter parsing within the static site editor. I'm working on this right now, and I've gone back and forth between using the approach we currently have and then using an existing library, specifically gray matter, or possibly something else. But right now, that's at the top of the list. Ultimately, there's a set of trade-offs that we're going to chat about. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. So kind of the goals of this chat, which should be about roughly 20 minutes or so, are here. So one is, as I kind of just mentioned, discuss gray matter trade-offs. Ooh, I realized I'm going to have to reshare so you can see. More things. Okay, so, and Zoom hijacked my, sorry about that. Man, Zoom sometimes. All right, so we have this thread, which I can't click the link right now because Zoom is hijacking this. I'll figure that out. Then we have a current MR that actually showcases the implementation of gray matter against what we currently are using. And then another point to maybe address is gray matter is actually quite old, though a lot of existing projects are using it. Kind of some big name ones, quote unquote, which is kind of comforting in the sense that if we leverage it, you know, we're in good company in a way. But that's something to kind of be a little cognizant of. But there's a fork that's more up to date naturally. One of the specific, I just quickly scanned the changes. One of them specific to us that stood out to me was JSYAML was upgraded. So the reference to which JSYAML it uses. So that could be kind of important. And again, there might be other things that solve some of our issues. Like we could have no problem with this fork. I just haven't tested it yet. And then secondly, if we have time and maybe take a stab at an issue I ran into with this MR. Okay, now I can click cool. Where, sorry, I lost my train of thought. With this MR where now doing the gray matter approach resulted naturally in the tests failing, and then just trying to resolve that is basically all that piece is about. So we'll focus on number one. So Enrique, as you mentioned here, this is kind of what spawned this whole conversation. We've kind of gone over this. I then created that MR as I reference here, and we can look at that if necessary. And just kind of at a high level, this is what we get out of the box. When we just use gray matter without doing anything, you know, it naturally has initially 2, but now 3 core issues. And those issues are basically just conflict with what our ideal user experience is for our users, right? Like, ideally, you just open the existing file. There should be no changes, right? Like it's just is what it is. But now with this gray matter approach, we have 3 issues, and those are, and you can see it here in this image, in the gray matter chunk block itself, quotes are not preserved. As I mentioned with respect to this fork, that may be resolved in the JSYAML that got updated. So that could be just solved. I have no idea, which would be cool if that's the case. The other one is any spacing between the front matter and the content itself. So you see this on line 6 over here where my cursor is. That gets removed because the way gray matter works is it separates those out and it glues them back together, and it never considers the spacing at all. It does have a what I thought was a semi-promising API that was referred to as I forget what it's called, but like you could basically have some amount of content intentionally in between. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but it didn't account for just empty spacing, which would have been awesome because then that would have solved that. And then lastly, it also adds a new line at the end of file change. So those are the kind of the 3 core ones. A potential change in the front matter, the spacing for sure, and then a new line at the very end. And then basically Jean kind of provided some feedback in terms of a feeling I was already feeling, which is it's okay for us to have these, at least in the short term, with the trade-off being kind of a little bit poorer UX in the short term and something we can probably resolve against having what we have currently, which is a much more complex solution that we'd have to maintain. And that's basically like the main trade-off. So I don't know, Enrique, is that kind of a good overview? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great overview. I'm thinking in the same line as Jan. I'm I'm trying to compare right now the WYSIWYG editor, Tools UI, also introduces changes, formatting changes, because there are formatting preferences to generate Markdown. The the list marker.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the characters that we use for emphasis and bold, etc. So how those formatting preferences differ from what gray matter is doing with the YAML and with the empty lines. I wonder if we should interpret the changes that gray matter is introducing in the same way. What do you think?
I think so. Like again, this is so. I think we're kind of at the point, and correct me if I'm wrong, where we're just going to kind of opt into gray matter for the time being, and we're okay with this trade-off. Again, the initial goal, and I was wrestling with this, going back and forth between exactly to your point what you just said. We're already enforcing a set of standards. What makes the front matter related edits any different? And I think that's what you're saying. Is that right? Yeah.
That's
So
right.
in that sense, I think it is. And again, this is something I was wrestling with back and forth. Like again, my main goal I was solving for was the end user experience, having the most minimal noise. And I've kind of stepped back a little bit from that. In that we'll have a much simpler solution. And I think, so that's just number one, I guess. And number two is I think we can actually solve all of these things with another step that we could layer on top of gray matter, for example. Like, it's kind of easy to foresee us still doing this. I actually did it for the spacing one, but we'll do that in a follow-up just to keep this MR simpler. I think we can resolve all these things still. And the difference would be is we'd have a fundamentally simpler solution in that we use gray matter, and naturally we delegate all the parsing and we reduce all the complexity that we have with our current solution. So that's a big win. That temporary trade-off we have, which is the three issues I mentioned previously, we can now layer on another processing step on top of gray matter, for example, to maintain and resolve these issues. With, again, that would add a little bit of complexity, but in comparison to the beginning solution, the delta would be way smaller, right? The complexity addition that we'd add on top of gray matter would be really small compared to if we were to continue down the path that we are currently. So I think we can actually get to a scenario where we don't have any of these issues. We might maybe still in just the front matter portion, but the end of line one and the spacing, we could totally resolve those pretty simply, in my opinion, because we already have because we have this parse source file abstraction already. It's basically kind of a small abstraction to using gray matter, and it's what allows us to do that. We could totally solve at least the second and third issue. The JS YAML under the hood that gray matter is using, that's where I have a little bit of less confidence in that we'd be able to solve in the front matter portion, but we could definitely solve it just the way we are currently. And actually, at least for the handbooks case, we could solve all our source files in batch such that the user wouldn't experience the front matter issue, or at least would be extremely minimal compared to like if they were to add something new. So I think we actually do have an endpoint where we still solve for all these problems, but just have a much simpler, more maintainable solution, basically.
So I have another observation and question about YAML. So reading the article that Jan shared in his comment, I noticed that using quotes is usually not necessary in YAML. Yeah, unless you are introducing some kind of a special character. So
Correct.
have we tested that JS YAML adds a quote, add quotes when it is necessary?
That is a great question. So I actually did, after you had that comment, I did, I just used the exact examples that they have and saved it. And we do get some stuff we don't like, and I'd have to dig into why that's the case. So like the obvious example is, which is what already happened, this is ours. So I'll take a step back, sorry. So to your point, the link that, and for those listening, this link is what you're referring to, right?
Uh-huh.
And then, yeah, I actually basically took a snippet of the examples, kind of the TLDR of that article of samples, and actually just loaded it up with the current MR, and then just saved it to see what the output is. And this is what we get. So I was actually a little bit surprised that this one added the string. I have no idea why that's the case. And again, we could look at all these in detail, but yeah, there's definitely something going on where it changes it not to our liking. So I'm not, that actually surprises me quite a bit, because I would expect JS YAML to just, like, it's the parser for YAML. So I would expect it to be like, it knows how to parse YAML and respects all the quote variations and expectations around that. So I was quite surprised about this. It may be, and again, I'd have to figure this out, it may be that Toast UI actually did this. You know what I mean? Like it actually somehow, I don't know, I'd have to look, but that was it was a little surprising.
So it's, so what I'm trying to understand is, let's say that someone is editing a handbook page, and it say that person is editing the front matter, and they add this title, learning resources, and they add quotes, so they are not necessary. And I noticed that JS YAML is adding some quotes in the line 8. That apparently is because it is necessary, right?
Yeah, it's adding a quote to the beginning, and it's also adding a quote right here. So that seems wrong to me, but it could be right.
It is added at the, oh, okay. I think that maybe we can check the rules. I think that there is a reason for that.
Okay. Yeah, again, I did this real quick. So just a quick point. Yeah, there's we can feed options into the instance that then gets fed to JS YAML. So yes, we could look into those. Again, I did this just super quick after you shared that article. So this may totally be resolved. And I would expect it to be honest, because again, JS YAML, that's its job, is to parse YAML, and it should know about the variations that can occur. So
exactly, it's a complete YAML parser
exactly.
and renderer. So my point is, perhaps JS YAML is outputting correct YAML, and the user that is editing the handbook is writing wrong YAML. So I don't see the point of protecting what the user is doing when we are actually fixing the front-end matter that they are writing using the static site editor.
I think so too. And I actually did I don't know where it is. You may recall this. I don't know if I added you or not. But like, as you can see, just in this example of title and description, there's actually no technical need to use the quotes. It's just that in our handbook, that's been the convention for so long, and it may just be a copy pasted kind of convention. I just don't know the origin of it. You know, the handbooks existed, I think, for 6 to 8 years or something, right? With like, I don't know, probably 1,000+ contributors. I have no idea, right? Like a lot of people. So it could have just been a convention that people started following, and it wasn't like a tight, strict convention. Because again, there's no technical reason to have the quotes. It's just, it still works. So exactly to your point, the JS YAML actually just says those are unnecessary and strips them. So I think we're on the same. I'm just still a little surprised about these changes, but again, that might just, I did a quick test, so I just don't know.
Perhaps, and I don't know if people is used to use other WYSIWYG tools. For example, my experience is that perhaps 10 years or 15 years ago, when I used to use Dreamweaver. I don't know if you if you used to use that tool, right?
I used it, yes, for sure.
So Dreamweaver was generating HTML and CSS, and it was not respecting my preferences. And if I wanted to use the WYSIWYG tools, I had to understand that that was what Dreamweaver was generating, unless I was like, specifying some preferences. So I think that, in my opinion, that's an assumption that users should be educated about. Like, okay, you're using a WYSIWYG tool, and it's going to generate a very specific type of content based on some formatting preferences.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again,
by the way,
I was just gonna say, again, we can actually preempt like this, right? For example, like like when I just mentioned that I did a quick scan of the our files, it actually worked out to be exactly 80-20 throughout the handbook, where I think I just looked for title and description. That was the only key I looked for. But 80% still had the quote at the front and 20% didn't. So that's just like an interesting distribution, but they weren't necessary. And like a huge majority, again, we're talking specifically in the context of the handbook with this noise. Obviously, we need to account for everything else. But again, that kind of goes back to your point of our education, which would also come back to the handbook use case. But we could actually preempt our handbook use case because we have all the source, that we could just clean this up to begin with, and they wouldn't even have that issue. And that's something like that's a boring solution, right? We could just batch clean, and we're already kind of doing that as I mentioned earlier about. I know right now you're actually working on some of that stuff specifically. So
that's right. And within that experience of fixing those problems, I've noticed that users don't care about all of the formatting changes that the editor is introducing. What they are really concerned is about when the editor breaks the page, and that is happening in several cases.
Sure.
Cool. By the way, I have another thought about the first error that you pointed out. Well, the first problem that you pointed out, that is that we are introducing changes even without the user performing any action in the editor. Mm-hmm. I think an alternative way of seeing this is that maybe we could avoid parsing the front matter if the user doesn't open the WYSIWYG editor to edit the front matter.
Can you say that again? Sorry, I had it for a second, then I lost it.
So imagine that that the user opens the static site editor. Usually, what we do right now is to use the parsers file service and separate the front end matter from the content of the page. Mm-hmm. And we do that to hide the front end matter in the WYSIWYG editor. So imagine that we don't have to do that, and we just pass the entire file to the editor. And the editor through how to hide the front matter. Sorry, my connection is unstable. I don't know if you heard that.
I got you. You broke up for a second, but I got you. Basically, I think what you're saying is, can we? Yeah, we can solve that. I'm sure. It sounds like specifically like your solution might be. It sounded like you were suggesting that maybe the WYSIWYG mode, we actually have a custom renderer or something that just removes the front matter as opposed to the way we're doing it right now with parse source file. Maybe I don't know.
Exactly. That's the idea. We cannot do that right now. But eventually, perhaps we don't have to mutate the file. We don't have to modify it to extract the front matter. And we just need to parse it and hide it because the front matter becomes part of the AST. Sure. And if the user wants to open the WYSIWYG tools to edit front matter, then we perform that action, that mutation. Mm-hmm. So that's I've been like playing with that idea because the reason that we are performing these mutations in and extracting the front matter is because the markdown mode and the WYSIWYG mode of the editor live in the same place, and we cannot separate. We cannot separate, let's say, the data. But let's say that we start using like we have control over the markdown mode and the WYSIWYG mode, like they are separate entities.
Sure.
Perhaps we don't have to extract them from the matter anymore. So in a future where we start, perhaps we replace the markdown mode of TOS UI with editor lite, we get that control back, and we can avoid metering the page unnecessarily.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree. I appreciate you sharing the context of, again, people I guess listening might not know, like we're obviously rethinking. Since implementing Toast UI, we've come and hit like a list of issues that we would like to get resolved, and so we actually want to have a solution that actually, as you just mentioned, allows us to separate those two modes, basically being able to actually have a proper AST external from Toast UI. Does have Toastmark, which is great, but there's some shortcomings obviously with it being so baked into the WYSIWYG mode as well. So that's what we learned basically in this implementation. So cool. I totally agree. Like I think that makes total sense. So basically what I'm hearing essentially is we're gonna go forward with gray matter for the time being. From an iteration standpoint, we'll just handle we'll just have this noise in the, the noise is gonna occur, and then in follow-ups in the near term, we can do the various steps to solve each of those three issues. And then, which again is in the short term, kind of do a batch fix for these. We could add a layer to reinforce these or preserve the spacing and remove the end line. And then when we get to the next phase where we actually have the proper AST and separation, then this will be solved through that essentially. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Well, once we have like, when we can scale our approach, we will have more control and we will be able to do more things.
Sweet. Okay, cool. That was super helpful. Again, the past few days have been kind of interesting because I've like in my head mentally been like, gray matter because it's so much simpler. And then, man, there's all these shortcomings, again, just from the UX kind of target, but we can still solve those and remove a lot of complexity. So I'm glad we had this chat for sure. So.
Yeah, I'm very happy as well. It's been very, very cool and very educational about, how YAML works and all of that. It's a very interesting program. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, it's one of those things like similar with Toast UI, you never know until you're actually in the weeds doing the work that you uncover these interesting little scenarios. Like there's no way to know about it otherwise. So you just, you got to build and then learn. So. Cool.
Cool.
All righty. Well, I think we're at time. Is there anything else you want to hit on or?
Not on my part.
Okay. Cool. All righty. Thank you. And we'll probably see you in the chat.
Thank you, Derek. Bye.
Yep.